Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 2 of conflict analysis and transformation. This week, we'll be looking at more closely into what we mean by conflict transformation and a few examples and how it connects to unification worldview. So this week, you'll be reading the little book of conflict transformation by John Paul Lederach. Lederach coined this term, conflict transformation, in the 1980s because he felt that the traditional ways of looking at conflict and analyzing them and developing interventions for them were insufficient. Conflict transformation seeks to have a more holistic approach, while conflict resolution will typically look at ending a particular episode of a conflict or coming to an agreement to end the conflict. Conflict transformation seeks a broader view. Basically, it's a theory on how to view or analyze or interpret a conflict so that the recommendations or the interventions can be more effective and sustainable over a longer period of time. So just very simple example, in a conflict between a husband and a wife over the sharing of household chores, a conflict resolution approach might look at, well, who is doing which chores, what is the time and energy involved for each, the husband and the wife. And maybe the conflict resolution approach would look at how to divide responsibilities more equally between the two and communicate better about their expectations around chores. The goal is just to resolve this one issue. On the other hand, the conflict transformation approach would look at the larger context, maybe looking at recurring arguments and situations where one or the other or both are not feeling heard or respected or supported. It's not just about the tasks of the chores, it's about showing their support for the family. The conflict transformation approach would also maybe look at the chores and how they were dealt with in their family of origin as they were growing up. How were they dealt with? Because usually you bring that into your new family. The goal of the conflict transformation is not just to end this particular conflict, but in the process of discovering what is connected, and the bigger context, the history, how the couple can develop a deeper and better relationship. The most violent conflicts in our world are those that are most resistant to change and to peace. They're very complex. So we need this holistic approach. It's not just about one conflict in one point of time. So especially because if we are interested in building peace, peace isn't just the ending of a conflict. Even after peace deals are signed, and treaties are made, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of trauma, there's resentment that needs to be transformed and healed. So maybe the physical conflict is ended, but after war or violence, relationships are shattered, trust was broken, and it takes time to get back to normal life. And this conflict transformation approach, it resonates closely with the unification worldview. This is just one example from Mother Han. She said that my husband and I have dedicated our lives exclusively to building a world of lasting peace. This has been our lifelong God-centered mission. We have always taught that peace is not merely an absence of violent conflict. Peace comes into being whenever relationships are characterized by harmony, balance, and mutual respect. Such relationships are created when we practice unselfishness by living for the sake of others. This is the essence of true love. So the conflict transformation approach seeks to look at the process of ending a conflict so that in the process, we are building relationships of harmony, balance, and mutual respect. So we might look at things like who has been marginalized and why. What are some of the systems which have contributed to the outbreak of this conflict? Maybe there are socioeconomic systems in place. Is there rule of law? Is there quality access to education, equal access? And we can't just look at the conflict at one point in time. We also have to think about what is the historical context, what has happened in the past, which is contributing to this present conflict. What are some of the views that each side has toward the other, and how are those views informed by their history or their culture or their religion? What are the stories that people in the conflict or parties to the conflict tell about the other, them versus us? What do they say? Who are the other side? And what do they say about themselves? And how does that contribute to misunderstandings? So conflict transformation looks at addressing the content, the context, and the structure of the relationships that are part of this conflict. So let's look at Lederach's definition. This is from his book. Conflict transformation is to envision and respond to the ebb and flow of social conflict as life-giving opportunities for creative, constructive change processes that reduce violence, increase justice in direct interaction in social structures, and respond to real-life problems in human relationships. It's a very long definition. There's a lot going on here. And he does go into each element of this definition, especially the italicized portions in his book. But just to pull out a few key points. First is, in the Lederach's view, conflict is a normal part of human relationships, simply because each person is different. We have different opinions, different viewpoints, different life experiences. So there's always going to be some conflict just in normal life of relating to each other. That doesn't mean that every conflict leads to violence, and they can be small or minor, complex or more widespread. But important is in this definition is that the conflict can be an opportunity for constructive change. Many times conflict doesn't bring positive change, and that's many times we see that example in the world and in our histories. And many communities are stuck in seemingly endless cycles of conflict. Conflict can simply also be a part of a path towards growth. It's uncomfortable. In many cases, people are hurt, but it's also an indicator that something is wrong in the society and something needs to be addressed. And it can't be addressed by simply stopping the fighting. The conflict resolution mindset might think about the short term, just end the conflict. But conflict transformation seeks to look at the patterns, the relationships, the systems which contribute, and address those aspects as well to minimize the chance that conflict will or violence will break out again in the future. So Lederach gives the analogy of the ebbing and flowing of social conflict, seeing as it's like a series of hills and valleys. There's peaks. The hills are like the particular outbreaks, one episode of a conflict. If we look only at the one peak, we miss the entire mountain range. We miss the valleys, which those may be times when negotiations are failing or stalling, or there's a tense situation. So with conflict transformation, you're trying to get a wider view. It's more than just seeing peace as like a static end state, but is something that's continuously evolving and building as we go through our relationships. So this is, you'll hopefully be familiar with this after your reading, but this is 3 inquiries that Lederach brings through the conflict transformation approach. So first, we're going to look at each one of these in turn. First is the presenting situation or the current status of the conflict. So, you don't look at just the issue itself, but you need to look at the patterns that surround this issue, which contribute to it, which exacerbate it, make it worse. And you need to look at the history that led up to that point. The conflict is just a current manifestation of a long history in many, many cases. By way of example, if we look at the 1994 Rwandan genocide and the aftermath, basically the Rwandan genocide, in case you're not familiar, happened between April and July 1994. In about 100 days, between 800,000 to 1 million people were targeted and murdered. The issue is very complex, but primarily those who were doing the killing were the designated Hutu racial group, and those who were victims belonged to the Tutsi racial group. Also, many moderate Hutus, or those who did not buy into the genocide ideology at the time, those people were also targeted and killed, or even people who were married to Tutsis. So if we look at this first inquiry in Letter X framework, the issue is the genocide. We can't just look at it as this one instance, this one issue, even though it's horrific and it's debilitating to the entire country. But if you zoom out and look at the entire mountain range, so to speak, and the ebb and flow of conflict, we'll find that it is one piece in a pattern of conflict and violence. So we have to place these patterns within the larger context of the pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial history of Rwanda and in this region of Africa. There are actually patterns of violence and resentment that existed between these groups in the years leading up to the outbreak of the genocide. There were other mass killings of Tutsis prior to 1944. And even these patterns are still just one piece of the entire puzzle. Prior to colonization, there were actually three groups within this region, which eventually became modern-day Rwanda. There were Tutsis, there were Hutus, and the Twa. And these distinctions actually were not based on ethnicity or race. They were more based on socioeconomic distinctions and occupations. So there was a lot more flow between whether someone was a Hutu or a Tutsi. A Hutu could become a Tutsi, for example. And generally speaking, there were harmonious relationships between these groups. But over Rwanda's colonial period, the distinction between Hutus and Tutsis became a lot more stark and solidified and rigid. As the Germans and then later the Belgians saw these groups in terms of race, and they generally favored the Tutsis over the Hutus in administrative positions in the government, and the colonial powers believed that Tutsis were superior racially, and especially from 1935, the Belgians introduced mandatory racial identification cards. So then gradually, it became more about whether you were Hutu or Tutsi, especially about facial features and height and body composition, mostly arbitrary distinctions which didn't exist prior to the colonial period. So in this experience of being subjugated and treated as inferior, the resentment between these groups becomes deeper and deeper. It becomes us versus them, Hutu versus Tutsi. And this distinction becomes more and more radicalized. The Hutus feel marginalized, the Tutsis were being favored. So the conflict transformation approach must consider those histories, those patterns, and the presenting issue. How has all those things brought people to where they are in a particular conflict. And actually, the country of Rwanda has implemented widespread peace education from in many areas, from children to adulthood, to teach people so they can understand that history of divisions and present a vision for moving forward beyond the hatred between the groups and the blaming and the resentment. So eventually, for this country, the distinction, the goal, their vision is that the distinction becomes less and less important. And so the conflict between these groups less and less frequent and less violent. So let's turn to inquiry number 2 in Lederach's framework. So this is the horizon of the future. In other words, the long-term goals. Where are we heading? And the questions of the conflict transformation, again, is not just end the conflict. It is what is the future we want? We want to end this current situation. It's destructive, but what is the future that we want to build? And then how do we get there? What do we need to do now in order to reach that future? We need to define that future. This is about vision and orienting interventions toward the future we want to build. Lederach says that in this inquiry, it brings up questions like, what do we hope to build? What would we ideally like to see in place? And how can we address all levels, the immediate solutions, as well as underlying patterns of relationships and structures? So the third inquiry is about developing the change processes that is based on the current reality and where we hope to be. We have this is our current reality. This is the situation right now based on the issues, the patterns, the history. This is the future that we want to be in terms of solutions, relationships, and systems. So therefore, what are the interventions that we need to develop? This is the third inquiry. And all these things are interrelated and interconnected. It's not something that's static or linear. For example, as you are addressing the challenges and the issues, maybe the defining a more hopeful future might shift or change. And in the process of working towards a more hopeful future, maybe new issues will come up or be brought to light. So then that might shift or change the interventions. So as we're taking a step towards this third area of inquiry, Lederach advocates that attempts to transform our current reality has to address these 4 areas: the personal area, relational, structural, and cultural. And each of these needs to consider both the episode of the conflict, that's the short-term immediate conflict, and the epicenter, that's the long-term patterns and the history. So in order to move forward towards a desired future and move toward a more peaceful reality, maybe we need to put in place certain laws. For example, maybe laws need to be changed. Free and fair elections need to be implemented. Maybe there need to be some formalized peace agreements or plans for power sharing in a new government. There may be a need to bring justice, not just hold people accountable, but also heal the relationships and the communities. In our Rwanda example, there were many different efforts in the country. I mentioned the peace education efforts. And these efforts were to help people to develop a united cultural identity, right? Beyond just Hutu or Tutsi, but being proud of being a Rwandan. This is in the cultural area. In South Africa, another example, after the end of apartheid, there was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which aimed to bring perpetrators to justice, but also to bring closure and healing to victims and their families. If we think about after a civil war, for example, how do you reintegrate former soldiers into society? Um, maybe people are living together next to their former enemies. How do you help smooth those transitions? Um, how do you implement, this is kind of structural, how do you implement nonviolent ways for people to resolve their conflicts, so they don't have to resort to violence? Um, People, especially marginalized groups, will need ways to have their voices heard, their needs heard, and addressed without resolving to violence. Perhaps a conflict transformation approach in this third inquiry would look into utilizing cultural or religious leaders to bring positive change. So when we look at these areas as a whole, we can look at, there we go. And we consider how they interconnect and relate to each other, we increase the chance that conflicts can be transformed into a more positive future. Um, Conflicts can be an opportunity for growth without resorting to violence or war. And without that broader view, history can repeat itself and patterns of violent conflict reemerge over and over. So if we apply this theory of conflict transformation to the peace work of Father Moon and Mother Han, I think we can see clearly that their work speaks to substantially transforming relationships, as Lederach is talking about. Just very clear example, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, the reconciliation between Kim Il-sung and Father Moon and Mother Han. By all accounts, they had every reason to hate Kim Il-sung and wish for violence against him, right? There's every reason for a conflict. In her memoir, for example, Mother Han talks about her very difficult journey, escaping from the north to the south with her mother and grandmother. At one point, her mother and grandmother were arrested in the north. These are her caretakers. She was just a child, and they were arrested simply because they were Christian. And Father Moon was also personally targeted by North Korea and by Kim Il-sung as a religious leader, and as he was a very vocal and staunch anti-communist, right? Just for example, he was arrested in 1946 in North Korea, tortured very close to death. A month later, just a month later, barely have time to recover. He was sent to Hungnam labor camp, which is essentially a death sentence. Most people didn't last 6 months in that labor camp, and it was a hell for him for those 3 years. And there was a third time in 1987 when Kim Il-sung tried to kill Father Moon. Several people were captured by the FBI, who were on the way to Morning Garden, which is in Gloucester. They were arrested and found carrying explosives, and very clear what their intentions were. So these reasons alone are justification for conflict or even a desire for violence against Kim Il-sung. But Father Moon and Mother Han consistently prayed and spoke for peace and reconciliation. And this was not just a lip service or for the sake of expanding or inflating their own egos or for them to look good, but they practiced what they preached. For example, it's just this one very simple example, this kind of the starting point of so much more, which I'll get into, was this historic meeting with Kim Il-sung in 1991. In her memoir, Mother Han explains, we had set a goal by the end of 1991 that they wanted to go to North Korea and meet with Kim Il-sung. For more than 40 years, my husband and I had been unable to return to our hometowns. Through the 1980s, we taught our principles in every corner of the world, but we couldn't go to North Korea, which is only an hour's flight from Seoul. It was the same for all displaced Koreans who had ended up in the South after the Korean War. Nothing can alleviate the longing and anguish that results from the inability to visit one's hometown, especially when it is so near. Nonetheless, the reason my husband and I wanted to go to North Korea was not to visit our hometowns and relatives, even though we missed them dearly. In fact, the experiences we had been through in the North would lead most people to never want to set foot there. She further explains that if we had thought of him, if we had thought of him as only our enemy, we could not have forgiven him. Only in the position of his parents, only with the heart of his mother could I forgive. To save her son sentenced to death, a mother will even seek to change the laws of her country. This is what the maternal heart is like. With that heart, I pledge to forgive my enemy. I did not pray for our safe return from North Korea. Only after we had dissolved all the buried pain did my husband and I inform those who needed to know that we were on our way to North Korea. It's a very clear internal work that they had to do, clearing out their hearts and their resentment so that that could lead to healing the relationship. So for Father Moon as well, meeting with Kim Il-sung, in his heart, it was like being reunited with his brother. This is not, some kind of stranger. This is not my enemy. This is my brother. You can see it in the videos and the photos in this meeting, the approach that he had towards Kim Il-sung. Even if you see meetings of world leaders from allied countries, you do not see the same level of warmth and embrace. It wasn't just for the cameras or for show. They also spoke very candidly. Father Moon spoke his mind like you do with a brother that you care about. This is a very, I think, very interesting recount from Bo Hee Pak, who traveled with Father Moon and Mother Han at that time. He said that I could spit on Kim Il-sung. However, Father said, I forgive you, I love you as my brother, and I unite with you. In pictures, you can see Father and Kim Il-sung looking at each other almost like brothers who have been separated for 10 years. Father said he met Kim Il-sung as a friend. Then after lunch, they came out as brothers. And next time, Kim Il-sung will be as Father's son. I told Father that he should be in the center between Mother and Kim Il-sung in the photographs. But Father said, no, my future son should be in the center. We must surround him with true love. So an important piece of this historic reconciliation is that they went without even a hint of personal gain or personal agenda. Kim Il-sung had arranged for a visit for Father Moon's hometown, which had also been restored in anticipation of that visit. Family members were brought to meet them when they arrived. In North Korea, especially during that time period, information is tightly controlled. Regular people, regular citizens don't travel around unless they have special permission from the government. So it's not like these family members could, hear about it and decide on their own to show up to meet Father Moon. It had to be arranged by the government. It had to be a specific effort sanctioned by Kim Il-sung. In her memoir, Mother Han writes about how they visited Father Moon's hometown, and then how she looked out in the direction where her hometown is in Anju, only 18 kilometers away, wondering about and also longing for being able to see her home again. But they remain focused on their purpose of their visit, not indulging in their personal desires. And at that time, it was even illegal for South Koreans to go to North Korea. They had nothing to gain personally by going there. Father Moon writes in his autobiography that he did not allow himself to cry even, and even though he felt a waterfall of tears in his heart. So this photo on the top right is a picture of Father Moon's home, which was restored by North Korean government in anticipation for his visit. At the bottom right is from a photo of when one of Father Moon and Mother Han's sons visited North Korea, and they were also brought, and they brought a showing of respect for the burial site for Father Moon's parents. Final important point about this meeting, and which truly made it a transformation of a conflict, is that investment in North Korea continued even after this one visit. It wasn't just an isolated point in time. Just for example, Father Moon and Mother Han invested in economic joint ventures based on an agreement that grew out of this meeting in 1991. They built the Pyeonghwa Motors factory, as well as the Botong River Hotel and the World Peace Center in Pyongyang. These were not created for the sake of profit for Father Moon or for the unification movement, but really the motivation was for helping North Korea. Pyeonghwa Motors, for example, was one of the first among the first joint economic ventures with North Korea between North and South, paving the way for others in the future, such as the Kaesong Industrial Complex. It provides an opportunity. It was intended to provide an opportunity for North Koreans to gain skills by working in this factory, which can also contribute more broadly to the economy in North Korea. The management and the shares of the hotel and Pyeonghwa Motors, they were passed over completely to North Korea. And this is an important gesture because it's substantially demonstrating that we're not here for personal gain, and the motivation is to help North Korea, and the motivation is sincere and authentic. On the left is a photo from when the South Korean president, Roon Moo-hyun, he visited the factory during an inter-Korean summit in 2007. There were many other positive outcomes of this initial meeting in 1991 with Kim Il-sung. Just for a few examples, North Korea's prime minister at the time led a delegation to Seoul afterwards and signed a joint declaration on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula with the South Korean government. And based on this meeting, initiatives to help families who were divided from the war were able to meet and exchange mail. These kind of meetings were created. After this meeting, it also opened up the way for North Korea to cancel their annual Hate America Day. I'm not an expert in this topic, but there are many more examples of efforts like this, which were not for their personal gain. And these investments were given for the perspective of laying the groundwork for peace in the future. What is clear is there was no agenda. They came with a sincere desire to embrace their so-called enemy, and they were recognized, and the relationship was transformed. Father Moon also often spoke about the process of subjugating Satan. It's not about attacking your enemy or forcing Satan to surrender, but voluntarily surrender, receiving an acknowledgement from your enemy for your uprightness and for your accomplishments. For example, he says, life is precious. Jesus said, for what shall it profit a man if he should gain the whole world and lose his soul? One can be qualified to become the owner of the universe only after experiencing the truth of these words. Have you become an owner with that qualification? When did you love God so much that even Satan praised you? When did you do something that moved even Satan's heart? So if we're looking at his words and what he's saying and what he exemplified, when did you love God so much that even Satan praised you? When did you do something that moved even Satan's heart? Kim Jong-un sent condolences after Father Moon passed, and he continues to send some kind of gesture to Mother Han, even after several years on the anniversary of his passing. Father Moon was awarded by North Korea the National Reunification Prize, as this is a substantial acknowledgement that Father Moon moved his enemy's heart and melted his heart. That kind of gesture and acknowledgement and respectfully honoring Father Moon and Mother Han and what they have done for North Korea has continued until this day. We can't say for certain when North Korea and South Korea will be reunited, and there can certainly be many points that seem like it will never happen. And there's many challenges between North and South Korea, many different ups and downs. But I think we can say with confidence that without this substantial effort of Father Moon and Mother Han, true reconciliation and transformation, things may have gone on a very different trajectory than they have. So let's put all this together: conflict transformation and unification worldview. When you're analyzing a conflict and thinking about how it can be resolved and ultimately transformed, what are the important things to remember or to ask yourself as you're exploring and looking into it? This is not an exhaustive list, and you can add to it certainly, but here are a few important ones. Number one, relationships based on connections of the heart are primary, and that thus transforming conflict requires healing those relationships. Father Moon and Mother Han, for example, they had to resolve their tangled up feelings in their hearts before approaching Kim Il-sung. Lederach puts an ultimate goal of conflict transformation as a healing of relationships between individuals and in communities. And thus, the recommended interventions for conflict transformation have to put that as a future goal on the personal, cultural, structural, and relational levels. How do we provide opportunities and training and efforts to help heal those relationships of the heart? Second, people need to feel truly seen, heard, and loved. Then even enemies let down their guard and can be won over. Father Moon and Mother Han received plenty of animosity and hatred and violence from North Korea and Kim Il-sung. But instead of responding in kind, they came with open hearts and ready to give. Father Moon and Mother Han approached Kim Il-sung not for their personal gain or with a selfish agenda behind their visit. They were thinking about the bigger picture for the sake of North Korea and even for the sake of the world. So if this deeply, deeply entrenched conflict can be resolved or can be transformed and see a more positive and more hopeful future, what else could be possible? Because of this, Kim Il-sung was won over, and such that even after he passed on this deep respect to his son and his grandson. And then third, conflict transformation is not a one-time effort, but investment in peace is ongoing and requires a continuous effort and investment. The effort of reconciliation with North Korea didn't end with just one visit in 1991, but Father Moon and Mother Han committed to investing long-term into many different peace efforts, from economic ventures, cultural initiatives, supporting the relationships between families who were divided during the war, also humanitarian efforts such as the 1% Love Share of Women's Federation for World Peace in Korea. As we saw in Lederach's model, these three areas of the current situation, the future vision for peace, and developing a process for change, they're all interconnected and they contribute to each other. Peace is not a static goal. It's continuous, it's dynamic, requiring consistent investment, reevaluating, adjusting, seeking improvement. It can be an opportunity to grow and to address some underlying issues and heal things that have been festering or laying buried, so that we can get closer to the future that we desire. And Lederach also talks about this change as a cycle. Sometimes we feel like we're moving forward, but sometimes we hit a wall, or we feel like things are moving backwards, or they collapse. Um, but it's a cycle, and things can move forward again with that continuous ongoing investment and believing and having the hope for the vision. And to conclude this course, as a whole, we situate ourselves in the broader realm of peace studies, which is a social science, the study of human behavior and relationships. Peace studies as a discipline has uh, grown significantly, especially after World War II, and now there are many different think tanks, research institutes, academic programs devoted to this field of peace studies. And this course is based in social science, and so there are a few important points to take note of as we move forward. Throughout the course, we are going to seek to benefit and learn from the lessons of those who have championed peace and worked towards peace historically. The materials we are learning from and studying are from these experts. And this course is not about political positions or proving your expertise about your region or about a particular issue or situation. The focus is on developing competencies. It's not on debate or argumentation. We're learning the skills for conflict analysis, looking at the facets and the different aspects of the viewpoints that we need in order to think about how to transform conflict and how to build peace, practically speaking, in real terms. So what are the key questions to ask and look for when looking at any conflict? So that even if you are presented a conflict that you are unfamiliar with the details, you can still apply these skills and ask the right questions. And you can be pointed in the right direction when you have the right framework. So we want to enhance our ability to discover ways to transform conflicts and foster the conditions needed to promote peace, so that we can bring those skills into our peace work and to what you are doing in the field. And just as part of HJI, this is also a chance to explore integrating the spiritual and the religious understanding into a practical analysis. The things that we learn and we hold very dear to us from a religious or spiritual perspective, they can have a practical application. We need to find the bridges between the practical and the spiritual. Peace is a very common theme, a very common hope, not just in unification theology, but throughout the world religions. But the question is, how do we get there? How do we bridge the practical and the spiritual? So in this course, we hope to explore some of those aspects to enhance our work. So here are just some references for this presentation. I think I'll post them together with the video so you can take a look deeper into some of these different aspects and hopefully learn more. So please take a look at your assignment for this week, and we'll see you soon.